Chapter 13. Pink rhymes with think. Udo awoke, slightly refreshed, and decided to take a firm line with the Countess at once. He had no difficulty about finding his way down to her. The palace seemed to be full of servants, all apparently busy about something which brought them for a moment in sight of the newly arrived prince, and then whisked them off, hand to mouth and shoulders shaking. By one of these, with more control over her countenance than the others, an annoyed Udo was led into Belvane's garden. She was walking up and down the flagged walk between her lavender hedges, and as he came in, she stopped and rested her elbows on her sundial and looked mockingly at him, waiting for him to speak. "Between the showers I mark the hours," said the sundial, on the suggestion of Belvane one wet afternoon, but for the moment the Countess was in the way.
"Ah, here we are,"
said Udo in rather a nasty voice. "Here we are," said Belvane sweetly. "All of us." Suddenly she began to laugh. "Oh, Prince Udo," she said, "you'll be the death of me. Count me as one more of your victims." It is easy to be angry with anyone who will laugh at you all the time, but difficult to be effective, particularly when— but we need not dwell upon Udo's handicap again.
"I don't see anything to laugh at," he said stiffly. "To intelligent people, the outside appearance is not everything."
"But it can be very funny, can't it?" said Belvane coaxingly. "I wished for something humorous to happen to you, but I never thought—"
"Ah," said Udo. "Now we've got it."
He spoke with an air of a clever cross-examiner who has skillfully extracted an admission from a reluctant witness. This sort of tone goes best with one of those keen legal faces. Perhaps that is why Belvane laughed again.
"You practically confess that you did it,"
went on Udo magnificently. "Did what?"
"Turned me into a
rabbit?" said Belvane innocently. A foolish observation like this always pained Udo.
"What makes you think I'm a rabbit?"
he asked. "I don't mind what you are, but you'll never dare show yourself in the country like this."
"Be careful, woman. Don't drive me too far. Beware lest you rouse the lion in me."
"Where?" asked Belvane with a childlike air. With a gesture full of dignity and good breeding, Udo called attention to his tail. "That," said the Countess, "is not the part of the lion that I'm afraid of." For the moment, Udo was nonplussed, but he soon recovered himself.
"Even supposing, just for the sake of argument, that I am a rabbit, I still have something up my sleeve. I'll come and eat your young carnations."
Belvane adored her garden, but she was sustained by the thought that it was only July just now. She pointed this out to him.
"It needn't necessarily be carnations," he warned her.
"I don't want to put my opinion against one who has, forgive me, inside knowledge on the subject, but I think I have nothing in my garden at this moment that would agree with a rabbit."
"I don't mind if it doesn't agree with me,"
said Udo heroically. This was more serious. Her dear garden, in which she composed, ruined by the machinations, what was the word? Of an enemy? The thought was unbearable. "You aren't a rabbit," she said hastily. "You aren't really a rabbit, because you don't waffle your nose properly."
"I could," said Udo simply. "I'm just keeping it back. That's all."
"Show me how!" cried Belvane, clasping her hands eagerly together. It was not what he had come into the garden for, and it accorded ill with the dignity of the royal house of Araby, but somehow one got led on by this wicked woman.
"Like this,"
said Udo. The Countess looked at him critically with her head on one side. "No," she said, "that's quite wrong."
Naturally, I'm a little out of practice.
I'm sorry, said Belvane. I'm afraid I can't pass you. Udo couldn't think what had happened to the conversation. With a great effort, he extracted himself from it.
Enough of this, Countess,
he said sternly.
I have your admission that it was you who put this enchantment on me.
It was I. I wasn't going to have you here interfering with my plans.
Your plans to rob the princess.
Belvane felt that it was useless to explain the principles of largesse throwing to Udo. There will always be men like Udo and Roger Scurvylegs who take these narrow, matter-of-fact views. One merely wastes time in arguing with them. My plans, she repeated.
Very well. I shall go straight to the princess, and she will unmask you before the people.
Belvane smiled happily. One does not often get such a chance. And who, she asked sweetly, will unmask your Royal Highness before the people, so that they may see the true Prince Udo underneath?
What do you mean?
Said Udo, though he was beginning to guess. That noble, handsome countenance, which is so justly the pride of Araby. How shall we show that to the people? They'll form such a mistaken idea of it if they all see you like this, won't they? Udo was quite sure now that he understood. Hyacinth had understood at the very beginning.
You mean that if the Princess Hyacinth falls in with your plans, you will restore me to my proper form, but that otherwise you will leave me like this.
One's actions are very much misunderstood, sighed Belvane. I've no doubt that that is how it will appear to future historians. To Roger, certainly. It was too much for Udo. He forgot his manners and made a jump towards her. She glided gracefully behind the sundial in a pretty affection of alarm, and the next moment Udo decided that the contest between them was not to be settled by such rough and tumble methods as these. The fact that his tail had caught in something helped him to decide. Belvane was up to him in an instant. There, she said soothingly. Let me undo it for your Royal Highness. She talked pleasantly as she worked at it. Every little accident teaches us something. Now, if you'd been a rabbit, this wouldn't have happened.
No, I'm not even a rabbit, said Udo sadly. I'm just nothing.
Belvane stood up and made him a deep curtsy. You are His Royal Highness, Prince Udo of Araby. Your Royal Highness's straw is prepared. When will your Royal Highness be pleased to retire? It was a little unkind, I think. I should not record it of her, were not Roger so insistent.
Now,
said Udo, and lolloped sadly off. It was his one really dignified moment in Euralia. On his way to his apartment, he met Wiggs.
Wiggs,
he said solemnly.
If ever you can do anything to annoy that woman, such as making her an apple pie bed or anything like that, I wish you'd do it.
Whereupon he retired for the night. Into the mysteries of his toilet we had perhaps better not inquire. As the chronicler of these simple happenings many years ago, it is my duty to be impartial. These are the facts, I should say, and it is for your nobilities to judge of them. Thus and thus my characters have acted. How say you, my lords and ladies? I confess that this attitude is beyond me. I have a fondness for all my people, and I would not have you misunderstand any of them. But with regard to one of them, there is no need for me to say anything in her defense. About her, at any rate, we agree. I mean Wiggs. We take the same view as Hyacinth. She was the best little girl in Euralia. It will come then as a shock to you, as it did to me on the morning after I had staggered home with Roger's 17 volumes, to learn that on her day, Wiggs could be as bad as anybody. I mean, really bad. To tear your frock, to read books which you ought to be dusting, these are accidents which may happen to anybody. Far otherwise was Wiggs's fall. She adopted, in fact, the infamous suggestion of Prince Udo. 3 nights later, with malice aforethought and to the comfort of the king's enemies and the prejudice of the safety of the realm, she made an apple pie bed for the countess. It was the most perfect apple pie bed ever made. Cox himself could not have improved upon it. Newton has seen nothing like it. It took Wiggs a whole morning, and the results, though private, that is the worst of an apple pie bed, were beyond expectation. After wrestling for half an hour, the countess spent the night in a garden hammock, composing a bitter ode to melancholy. Of course, Wiggs caught it in the morning. The countess suspected what she could not prove. Wiggs, now in for a thoroughly bad week, realized that it was her turn again. What should she do? An inspiration came to her. She had been really bad the day before. It was a pity to waste such perfect badness as that. Why not have the one bad wish to which the ring entitled her? She drew the ring out from its hiding place round her neck.
"I wish," she said, holding it up. "I wish that the Countess Belvane—"
She stopped to think of something that would really annoy her.
"I wish that the Countess shall never be able to write another rhyme again."
She held her breath, expecting a thunderclap or some other outward token of the sudden death of Belvane's muse. Instead, she was struck by the extraordinary silence of the place. She had a horrid feeling that everybody else was dead, and realizing all at once that she was a very wicked little girl, she ran up to her room and gave herself up to tears. "May you, dear sir or madam, repent as quickly." However, this is not a moral work. An hour later, Wiggs came into Belvane's garden, eager to discover in what way her inability to rhyme would manifest itself. It seemed that she had chosen the exact moment. In the throes of composition, Belvane had quite forgotten the apple pie bed, so absorbing is our profession. She welcomed Wiggs eagerly, and taking her hand, led her towards the roses. "I have just been talking to my dear roses," she said. "Listen. Whene'er I take my walks about, I like to see the roses out. I like them yellow, white, and pink, but crimson are the best, I think. The butterfly—" But we shall never know about the butterfly. It may be that Wiggs has lost us here a thought on Lepidoptera, which the world can ill spare, for she interrupted breathlessly.
"When did you write that?"
"I was just making it up when you came in, dear child. These thoughts often come to me as I walk up and down my beautiful garden. The butterfly—" But Wiggs had let go her hand and was running back to the palace. She wanted to be alone to think this out. What had happened? That it was truly a magic ring, as the fairy had told her, she had no doubt. That her wish was a bad one, that she had been bad enough to earn it, she was equally certain. What, then, had happened? There was only one answer to her question. The bad wish had been granted to someone else. To whom? She had lent the ring to nobody. True, she had told the princess all about it, but— Suddenly she remembered. The countess had had it in her hands for a moment. Yes, and she had sent her out of the room, and— So many thoughts crowded into Wiggs's mind at this moment that she felt she must share them with somebody. She ran off to find the princess. Chapter 14. Why Can't You Be Like Wiggs? Hyacinth was with Udo in the library. Udo spent much of his time in the library nowadays, for surely in one of those many books was to be found some advice to a gentleman in temporary difficulties suitable to a case like his. Hyacinth kept him company sadly. It had been such a brilliant idea inviting him to Aurelia. How she wished now that she had never done it. "Well, Wiggs," she said with a gentle smile, "what have you been doing with yourself all the morning?" Udo looked up from his mat and nodded to her.
"I found out," said Wiggs excitedly. "It was the Countess who did it."
Udo surveyed her with amazement.
"The Princess Hyacinth," he said, "has golden hair. One discovers these things gradually.
He returned to his book. Wiggs looked bewildered.
He means, dear, said Hyacinth, that it is quite obvious that the Countess did it, and we have known about it for days.
Udo wore, as far as his face would permit, the slightly puffy expression of one who has just said something profoundly ironical and is feeling self-conscious about it.
Oh,
said Wiggs in such a disappointed voice that it seemed as if she were going to cry. Hyacinth, like the dear that she was, made haste to comfort her.
We didn't really know, she said. We only guessed it. But now that you have found out, I shall be able to punish her properly. No, don't come with me, she said as she rose and moved towards the door. Stay here and help His Royal Highness. Perhaps you can find the book that he wants. You've read more of them than I have, I expect.
Left alone with the prince, Wiggs was silent for a little, looking at him rather anxiously.
Do you know all about the Countess?
She asked at last.
If there's anything I don't know, it must be very bad.
Then you know that it's all my fault that you are like this? Oh, dear Prince Udo, I am so dreadfully sorry.
What do you mean, your fault?
Because it was my ring that did it.
Udo scratched his head in a slightly puzzled but quite a nice way.
Tell me all about it from the beginning, he said. You have found out something after all, I believe.
So Wiggs told her story from the beginning, how the fairy had given her a ring, how the Countess had taken it from her for 5 minutes and had a bad wish on it, and how Wiggs had found her out that very morning. Udo was intensely excited by the story. He trotted up and down the library, muttering to himself. He stopped in front of Wiggs as soon as she had finished.
Is the ring still going? He asked. I mean, can you have another wish on it?
Yes, just one.
Then wish her to be turned into a...
He tried to think of something that would meet the case.
What about a spider?
He said thoughtfully.
But that's a bad wish,
said Wiggs.
Yes, but it's her turn.
Oh, but I'm only allowed a good wish now,
she added rapturously.
And I know what it's going to be.
So did Udo. At least he thought he did.
Oh, you dear,
he said, casting an affectionate look on her.
Yes, that's it. That I might be able to dance like a fairy.
Udo could hardly believe his ears, and they were adequate enough for most emergencies.
But how is that going to help me?
He said, tapping his chest with his paw.
But it's my ring,
said Wiggs,
and so of course I'm going to wish that I can dance like a fairy. I've always meant to, as soon as I've been good for a day first.
The child was absurdly selfish. Udo saw that he would have to appeal to her in another way.
Of course, he began, I've nothing to say against dancing as dancing, but I think you'll get tired of it, just as I shall get tired of lettuce.
Wiggs understood now.
You mean that I might wish you to be a prince again?
Well,
said Udo casually,
it just occurred to me as an example of what might be called the good wish.
Then I shall never be able to dance like a fairy.
Neither shall I, if it comes to that,
said Udo. Really, the child was very stupid.
Oh, it's too cruel,
said Wiggs, stamping her foot.
I did so want to be able to dance.
Udo glanced gloomily into the future.
To live forever behind wire netting,
he mused.
To be eternally frightened by pink-eyed ferrets. To be offered bran mash whenever one visited week after week, month after month, year after year, century after... How long do rabbits live?
But Wiggs was not to be moved.
I won't give up my wish, she said passionately.
Udo got onto his 4 legs with dignity.
Keep your wish, he said. There are plenty of other ways of getting out of enchantments. I'll learn up a piece of poetry by our court poet Sasharino and recite it backwards when the moon is new, something like that. I can do this quite easily by myself. Keep your wish.
He went slowly out, his tail looking more like a bell rope than ever, followed him solemnly. The fluffy part that you pull was for a moment left behind. Then with a jerk, it was gone, and Wiggs was left alone.
"I won't give up my wish,"
cried Wiggs again.
"I wish it now before I'm sorry."
She held the ring up.
"I wish that—"
She stopped suddenly.
"Poor Prince Udo. He seems very unhappy. I wonder if it is a good wish to dance when people are unhappy."
She thought this out for a little, and then made her great resolve.
"Yes," she said, "I'll wish him well again."
Once more she held the ring up in her 2 hands.
"I wish," she said, "that Prince Udo—"
I know what you're going to say. It was no good her wishing her good wish, because she had been a bad girl the day before, making the Countess an apple pie bed and all. Disgraceful. How could she possibly suppose— She didn't. She remembered just in time.
"Oh, bother,"
said Wiggs, standing in the middle of the room with the ring held above her head.
"I've got to be good for a day first. Bother."
So the next day was Wiggs's good day. The legend of it was handed down for years afterwards in Euralia. It got into the calendars. July 20th it was, marked with a red star. In Roger's portentous volumes it had a chapter devoted to it. There was some talk about it being made into a public holiday, he tells us, but this fell through. Euralian mothers used to scold their naughty children with the words, "Why can't you be like Wiggs?" And the children used to tell each other that there never was a real Wiggs, and that it was only a made-up story for parents. However, you have my word for it that it was true. She began by getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning, and after dressing herself very neatly and being particularly careful to wring out her sponge, she made her own bed and tidied up the room. For a moment she thought of waking the grown-ups in the palace and letting them enjoy the beautiful morning too, but a little reflection showed her that this would not be at all a kindly act. So, having dusted the throne room and performed a few simple physical exercises, she went outside and attended to the smaller domestic animals. At breakfast, she had 3 helps of something very nutritious, which the Countess said would make her grow, but only 1 help of everything else. She sat up nicely all the time and never pointed to anything or drank with her mouth full. After breakfast, she scattered some crumbs on the lawn for the robins, and then got to work again. First she dusted and dusted and dusted. Then she swept and swept and swept. Then she sewed and sewed and sewed. When anybody of superior station or age came into the room, she rose and curtsied and stood with her hands behind her back while she was being spoken to. When anybody said, "I wonder where I put my so-and-so," she jumped up and said,
"Let me fetch it,"
even if it was upstairs. After dinner, she made up a basket of provisions and took them to the old women who lived near the castle. To some of them she sang or read aloud, and when at one cottage she was asked,
"Now won't you give me a little dance?"
she smiled bravely and said,
"I'm afraid I don't dance very well."
I think that was rather sweet of her. If I had been the fairy, I should have let her off the rest of the day. When she got back to the palace, she drank 2 glasses of warm milk with the skin on, and then went and weeded the Countess's lawn. And once, when she trod by accident on a bed of flowers, she left the footprint there instead of scraping it over hastily and pretending that she hadn't been near the place, as you would have done. And at 6:30, she kissed everybody good night, including Udo, and went to bed. So ended July the 20th, perhaps the most memorable day in Euralian history. Udo and Hyacinth spent the great day peacefully in the library. A gentleman for all his fur, Udo had not told the princess about Wiggs's refusal to help him. Besides, a man has his dignity. To be turned into a mixture of 3 animals by a woman of 30, and to be turned back again by a girl of 10, is to be too much the plaything of the sex. It was time he did something for himself.
Now then, how did that bit of Sasharino's go? Let me see.
He beat time with a paw.
Blood for something, something like that. Blood for, no, it's gone again. I know there was a bit of blood in it.
"I'm sure you'll get it soon," said Hyacinth. "It sounds as though it's going to be just the sort of thing that's wanted."
Oh, I shall get it all right. Some of the words have escaped me for the moment, that's all. Blood. You must have heard it, Princess. It's about blood for he who some think. You must know the one I mean.
I know I've heard of it, said the princess, wrinkling her forehead. Only I can't quite think of it for the moment. It's about,
Yes, that's it,
said Udo. Then they both looked up at the ceiling with their heads on one side and murmured to themselves. But noon came, and still they hadn't thought of it. After a simple meal, they returned to the library.
I think I'd better write to Cornell,
said Udo,
and ask him about it.
I thought you said his name was Sasharino.
Oh, this is not the poet, it's just a friend of mine. But he's rather good at this sort of thing. The trouble is that it takes such a long time for a letter to get there and back.
At the word letter, Hyacinth started suddenly.
Oh, Prince Udo! She cried. I can never forgive myself. I've just remembered the very thing. Father told me in his letter that a little couplet he once wrote was being very useful for, removing things.
What sort of things?
Said Udo not too hopefully.
Oh, enchantments and things.
Udo was a little annoyed at the "and things," as those turning him back into a prince again was as much in the day's work as removing rust from a helmet.
It goes like this, said Hyacinth.
Bowl, Bilbo, Wol, Will.
It sounds as though it would remove anything, she added with a smile.
Udo sat up rather eagerly.
I'll try, he said. Is there any particular action that goes with it?
I've never heard of any. I expect you ought to say it as if you meant it.
Udo sat on his back paws, and gesticulating freely with his right paw, declaimed,
Bowl, Bilbo, Wol, Will.
He fixed his eyes on his paws, waiting for the transformation. He waited, and waited. Nothing happened.
It must be all right, said Hyacinth anxiously, because I'm sure Father would know. Try saying it more like this.
She repeated the lines in a voice so melting, yet withal so dignified, that the very chairs might have been expected to get up and walk out. Udo imitated her as well as he could. At about the time when Wiggs was just falling asleep, he repeated it in his 50th different voice.
I'm sorry, said Hyacinth. Perhaps it isn't so good as Father thought it was.
There's just one chance, said Udo. It's possible it may have to be said on an empty stomach. I'll try it tomorrow before breakfast.
Upstairs, Wiggs was dreaming of the dancing that she had given up forever. And what Belvane was doing, I really don't know. Chapter 15. There is a lover waiting for Hyacinth. So the next morning before breakfast, Wiggs went up onto the castle walls and wished. She looked over the meadows and across the peaceful stream that wandered through them to the forest where she had met her fairy, and she gave a little sigh.
Goodbye, dancing,
she said. And then she held the ring up and went on bravely.
Please, I was a very good girl all yesterday, and I wish that Prince Udo may be well again.
For a full minute there was silence. Then from the direction of Udo's room below there came these remarkable words. Take the beastly stuff away, and bring me a beefsteak and a flagon of sack. Between smiles and tears, Wiggs murmured,
He sounds all right. I am glad.
And then she could bear it no longer. She hurried down and out of the palace, away from Udo and the princess and the countess and all their talk, to the cool, friendly forest, there to be alone and to think over all that she had lost. It was very quiet in the forest. At the foot of her own favorite tree, a veteran of many hundred summers who stood sentinel over an open glade that dipped to a gurgling brook and climbed gently away from it, she sat down. On the soft green yonder she might have danced, an enchanted place. And now, never, never, never. How long had she sat there? It must have been a long time, because the forest had been so quiet, and now it was so full of sound. The trees were murmuring something to her, and the birds were singing it, and the brook was trying to tell it too, but it would keep chuckling over the very idea so that you could hardly hear what it was saying, and there were rustlings in the grass. Get up, get up. Everything was calling to her. Dance, dance. She got up, a little frightened. Everything seemed so strangely beautiful. She had never felt it like this before. Yes, she would dance. She must say thank you for all this somehow. Perhaps they would excuse her if it was not very well expressed.
This will just be for thank you, she said as she got up. I shall never dance again.
And then she danced. Where are you, Hyacinth? There is a lover waiting for you somewhere, my dear. In the first of spring, the blackbird opens his yellow beak and whistles cool and clear. There is blue magic in the morning. The sky, deep blue above, melts into white where it meets the hills. The wind waits for you up yonder. Will you go to meet it? Ah, stay here. The hedges have put on their green coats for you. Misty green are the tall elms from which the rooks are chattering. Along the clean white road between the primrose banks he comes. Will you be round this corner or the next? He is looking for you, Hyacinth. She rested, breathless, and then danced again. It is summer afternoon. All the village is at rest save one. Cuckoo! Comes from the deep dark trees. Cuckoo! He calls again and flies away to send back the answer. The fields, all green and gold, sleep undisturbed by the full river which creeps along them. The air is heavy with the scent of May. Where are you, Hyacinth? Is not this the trysting place? I have waited for you so long. She stopped, and the watcher in the bushes moved silently away, his mind aflame with fancies. Wiggs went back to the palace to tell everybody that she could dance.
"Shall we tell her how it happened?" said Udo jauntily. "I just recited a couple of lines, poetry, you know, backwards, and, well, here I am."
Oh,
said Wiggs.